Welcome everyone to another video on the channel. Today we're doing something a little different. It's been a long time since I've done something informational or kind of covering any specific types of topics. I've been doing a lot of entertainment and filler stuff because of everything going on. Don't have a lot of opportunity to go out and do things, and I've been very busy with other personal stuff to do any research. But here I am today trying to make up for that and make up for a few other things that I thought were kind of some drawbacks of my previous videos, because I've worked with Craig before, who I am talking to today. Most of the time, most of my videos are done using primary sources such as Craig, but I usually transcribe our conversations into script format, which sometimes might or might not lead to mistakes or errors in translation, as it were. And today I thought it'd be cool to do something different, where we just get to hear things in his words as the result of me asking him questions like how I normally would, except you guys get to witness that, and it's a bit less formal and more just kind of fun.
Good.
So we have a very predictable set of categories. A lot of the questions are either going to be about you or about specific cars or about the movies. Some of the questions I might either already know the answer to, or questions you might have already answered in the past, so we might not spend as much time on those. But we will at least cover them briefly, because some of these questions are questions that you guys have already told me to ask, so I thought I'd at least include them. But we can start with just asking questions about you. Like, for instance, like one of the questions I wanted to ask was, what actually got you started on cars?
If I trace it back, it really was when I got my first toy Batmobile from the TV series when I was about 3 or 4 years old. And I started watching Batman reruns on television. I just thought that car was just really cool. All the gadgets and buttons and stuff like that, the cockpit feel. I've always been an aviation buff. So if you notice one common theme in my cars, is that there's a lot of shit. There's a lot of stuff in the cockpit area. And that's just my affinity for aircraft and cars that are, highly technical. And then years later, I started as a latchkey kid. For those of your younger audience members who don't know what latchkey kid means, it means both your parents go to work and you come home to an empty house after school. And so the TV shows at that time, we only had channels 2, 4, 5, 7, 9, 11, and 13, and that was it. And then one VHF channel or UHF channel, I forget which way it went. Channel 52, which they showed this cartoon called Speed Racer, the original Speed Racer. And I said, someday I'm going to have a Mach 5, a car with the steering wheel with a bunch of buttons on it. And that's another theme that's been recurrent in my choices. So that's really what got me started.
Okay. I know you've got your GTR right now, and that's your favorite car that you've ever owned thus far. But in the modern and also, I guess, kind of classic climate, we don't have to talk about just new cars. I'm sure we already know what the tuner answer is, but today, like, what is your favorite holy trinity of cars? Like, when it comes to muscle, exotic, tuner, like, what would fill those slots as the ones that you would actually covet?
Good questions there. If I had to choose a muscle car, it'd be a 69 Mustang Boss 429. Always loved that car. Okay, so that would be my holy trinity for the domestic car side. On the tuner side, tough question. I'm going to dismiss the R35 GTR currently parked in my garage for a moment. And if I had to say one car, probably an R34 M-Spec there would be my holy trinity. Of course, it wouldn't be stock. It would be modified with Volk TE37s, that kind of stuff. Single turbo upgrade, sequential gearbox, all that kind of stuff. And then for Euro car, a lot of good Euro cars, old and new. I'm not an Italian car fan anymore. I've already been through Lamborghinis and found that the Diablos that I chose a poor choice. I never liked the Murcielago, with the exception of the LP640, which is a hell of a car. I am a Porsche fan. I do like Porsches, but if I had to pick one, and price with no limit, would be the Pagani Huayra. It's a $3 million car. I would pick that. If I had to live more within my means, I would say the new McLaren 765 LT that's coming out, the long tail, which is 754 horsepower, 0 to 60 in the 2s. Will probably run quarter miles in the high 9s and with some mild mods like they do with the 750. You can easily get that. Was 750 or 720? I forget.
The 720S.
720. They got that thing in the eights. So it's conceivable that a car that weighs under 3,000 pounds could be easily as fast. So that's my holy trinity.
All right, cool. This is a quick one. People wanted me to ask you this. I guess they thought your answer would be interesting. Burble, pop, and bang, and flame tunes. Do you love it, hate it, or not care?
Okay, so I'm going to contradict myself. I constantly, as a car guy, I hate beating up on my cars for no bloody purpose, right? So having pops and tunes, when you're just doing it, if you're doing it in a stock 350Z, it's not really cool. It's hard to do it in a stock 350Z without a tune and the cat's not removed, that kind of stuff. But if you have a built R34, an R35, a Mustang, a Camaro, anything that's got some serious horsepower, and I'm not talking about stock cars again, I'm talking about heavily modified cars, flames coming out of the exhaust at night is badass. I mean, it's hard to say no to that. But when you're sitting there and doing it at a car show, the reason I cringe at car shows is because the car show I go to, they throw you out for that stuff. You're expected to demonstrate some level of maturity, right? And when you go on like to the IBOC car meet, which is in Southern California, doing that, people are going to frown because it's just rude to the host. Other than that, you want to do that shit on the freeway, knock yourself out. I'll whip my camera out and take a picture of it.
All right, cool. So this is an interesting one. Throughout your lifetime, because you've had a few cars, we can talk about them in a moment. But throughout your lifetime, what would you say was your favorite car? The one that you enjoyed modifying the most, like either because, like for instance, like the Uber BMW M3 or the R35 because of how good the platform might be.
So I've gone through a couple of phases. I did drag race stuff with my supercharged Fox body Mustang with the 347 Vortec S-Trim and all that kind of stuff. That was a fun car to modify because there was an abundance of parts available in the automotive aftermarket. So that's one common thing that I maintain throughout my car modifying hobby. When I choose a car, I choose a car that has a lot of parts available for it in the aftermarket. So the culmination of that is when I bought the R34 because I had already had my hands on the option magazines and the catalogs from Japan. And there were so many parts available for that car. That was a dream because you could find really cool stuff. Not stuff that you find in Pep Boys, not APC, not shit you find on eBay, like things like the Nismo titanium strut tower bar, which just looked cool. Who knows if it did anything, but it looked cool. And it was Nismo and it was titanium. The carbon Kevlar airbox that I put in that car. The C West body kit with an all carbon fiber wing, including the uprights were all carbon fiber. I mean, it was a dream list of stuff that you could get. So I always pick cars that have that kind of capability. So at the top of the list has to probably be the R34. Second would probably be either one of my two Supras that I've had, because again, there's a preponderance of parts on the aftermarket. And then after that, probably the R35 GTR that I currently own.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, this is an interesting one. You've already covered this on your channel, where you did kind of a project with the people over at Need for Speed, where you built an R34 so they could scan it, and then that was later given away in some kind of contest. Was that the only work you did with Need for Speed?
Yeah, so Need for Speed Underground came out on the heels of Fast and Furious 1. After Fast and Furious, every form of media was trying to kind of capitalize on that popularity of that movie. So we were seeing it in TV shows and all that, and I got a call from EA Games. I was working with a friend of mine, Neil Chin, who does the Chin Edition Tour. I can't speak today. TJIN, very talented guy. Neil used to work for me many years ago. We got this call to build this car. They bought and imported an R34. They have divisions in multiple countries, Southeast Asia, Canada, and all that. So while the car wasn't legal in America to drive on roads, they still were able to bring the car here to get it modified. So when I was done doing the modification on the car, the paint, the body work, the stereo, and all that video, we knew the car was going to be given away. I also consulted on game dynamics. They flew me up to EA Games up in Vancouver, BC, British Columbia. And I spent 3 days there working on the game dynamics and giving them feedback on the cars and the engine sounds and all that. They actually used the same sound engineering group that they used for Fast and Furious 1. So a lot of people will probably notice that the sounds of some of the cars sound very much like the cars used in the first movie.
Yeah.
And for good reason. So after that, that was the end of that involvement. They moved on. to other games. I don't even know what the I think it was Most Wanted came out after that, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, so they did Underground. I can't remember what year they did that in. They did Underground 2, which had a lot of sounds from the first and second movies. And then they did Most Wanted in 2005. Everyone in my audience is very familiar with those games.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I played them too. I played Need for Speed Underground and played Underground 2. You know, the tracks were good. The graphics were just starting to get really good about that time for many of these video game franchises. But it wasn't realistic. And as a person who likes to track, I'm looking for a game that has good, realistic car dynamics. And so I just kind of outgrew it. I was in my early 30s at the time. While it was still pleasurable to do it then, I always kept falling back to Gran Turismo and then eventually Forza.
Okay. So if you had, I wouldn't necessarily call every project a build, but say for some insane reason you replaced your R35 with something else. Yes. What would be the first things you would do to it? Like, what are your steps of modifying a car?
All right, depends on the stated purpose of the car. Now, if I'm going to build a drift car, you go down that path. If you're going to build a drag car, you're going to build it down that path. But if you want a good, capable performer for a street car, it doesn't matter if it's a Miata or an R35, the recipe is the same. Intake, exhaust, suspension, brakes, and tires and wheels. Now, if you're going to be tracking it a lot or autocrossing it, obviously you need to have another set of tires and wheels. The driver mod is probably the number one thing people can do, is go out and get themselves educated on how to properly drive a car. But that aside, it's the same recipe no matter what kind of car you're in. If it's turbocharged and you don't want to start looking at building up the fuel system, maybe E85, upgrading turbos, turning up the boost, whatever that is in the supporting mods. But if you forget brakes and suspension, you're really overlooking a key element of the car's dynamic. And that needs to be addressed. So the plan is pretty simple. It's a recipe that's been followed for decades.
Okay. Going back to your previous car history, what are your most and least favorite cars that you have owned thus far?
Most favorite cars, I still put the R35 at top. I think my Audi RS4 would have been second. I had a 2007 Audi RS4, 420-ish horsepower, all-wheel drive, and 4 doors, and 8,200 RPM rev limit. That car was a beast. Porsche 996 has to be in there somewhere. I had a 996 Turbo, a 2003, which was a very enjoyable car. Great build quality. After that, probably my 1,000 horsepower Supra, the HKS fitted turbo TRD Supra, which was built initially by Ryan Roon. And then after that, probably my R34. I can go down. I mean, I've got 40 cars on the list, but something like that. Just looking around the pictures of the wall to make sure I didn't forget anything. My favorite show build was the M3, because that car would I don't care if you like Japanese cars or American cars, that car got a lot of attention.
I know that usually at the beginning of all your videos, you usually say some cars are heroes, some cars are zeros. Were there any cars that you'd say was an obvious zero?
Well, not obvious, but they turned out to be that way. I had a BMW 750. After I got rid of the RS4, I was hauling clients around. I was working for a digital marketing agency, and we were doing a lot of work with auto manufacturers and so forth. So I had this BMW 750 Li. It was the worst car I've ever owned. The door handle broke. You couldn't get in and out of the car on the driver's side. I was crawling through the window like Dukes of Hazzard. The headlight went bad. Every time they had to wait for parts and then get it painted, and the car would be down for 3-4 weeks. Then the valve seal started going bad, so I had to have that repaired. And then my BMW mechanic said that transmission was bad news and you should get rid of it before 100,000 miles. So it was working fine when I got rid of it. And I think the next owner didn't have any problem with it. I don't know what happened to it, but that car was a piece of shit. I had a Fiat 128 Spider when I was a kid. I was probably 21 years old. I said, yeah, I'll buy a convertible. That car was a colossal piece of shit. Let's see what else. I had an 81 Isuzu iMark, which was my first car, which was slower than turtle poop. And that was nuts. I threw a bunch of money at that, painting that car, Porsche red and all that stuff. It was just a turd. But I learned a valuable lesson for that. Don't try to spend good money on crummy cars. And that's something I preach to this day.
All right. Are there any other 90s cars that you wish you could own?
Well, I've always liked the Z32 300ZX. The Targa Top Z32 300 ZX. I've always liked that car. That would be one car from the 90s. An FD RX-7, but the problem is I knew at every point in my life that I wanted more than 300 horsepower. And that's the upper limit for the stock motor. At least that's what it was back in the 90s. Nowadays, you can get them up over 400 with, methanol injection, E85, and the right intercooler on it. You can do it, but I've always had a fondness for that particular car, the FD. As far as American cars go, there's nothing from the 90s I would want right now. Like, I can't think of a single car from the 90s I would want. That's American. As far as German cars, late 90s, the BMW 540, manual transmission, back when they were all analog. I've driven that car. It's superb.
This is an interesting question, and I know I'm probably going to say this wrong because there's a lot of car aftermarket brands that I can't pronounce correctly, but if you do have a preference between HKS or Greddy, or Trust in Japan, is there one, and potentially why?
Well, I have a great fondness for Greddy. They've been very good to me over the years. I know Kenji, the guy he was there when he first modified my first Supra before it became the Fast and Furious Supra. And he's just been a pleasure to deal with. In fact, everybody at Greddy has. I built a car with the HKS people back in the day, with a car for the DVD, that Evo, and their warehouse is very impressive, was in Southern California. And the equipment is superb, and I have great love for both. So it would be difficult. It would just depend on what we're talking about. I think the HKS turbos, their advancements, have been better than what Greddy has been doing with their turbos. But again, it depends on the application. No matter what year, make, and model car you have, there's a turbo kit that everyone has already tried out, it's tried and tested, and people say this is the one you should be using for this car and this purpose. So it just depends. I don't think one company is necessarily better than the other.
Yeah.
I just think that some of them have parts that are better for this car, and others have parts that are better for this car.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a feeling that question would be kind of a difficult one to answer. The original question was actually more specific. It was asking about two specific parts. The first one was the Greddy/Trust T78 turbo versus the HKS T04Z, and I felt that was kind of too specific. I wasn't sure.
Well, it's a good question. What it comes down to is the application, where the boost comes on in the car, right? And I've driven a T78 Supra, and they're lazy off the line, but that's old technology, right? Any number of GT turbos nowadays spool faster. The technology has come a long ways, right? So it's very rare to find a TL4 on anything, a T51 on anything, for example, because that turbo has been discontinued and replaced with something else. But I still see TL4s running around. I don't see many T78s or T88s running around. That's old technology. That technology was available for cars in the 90s, and here we are more than 20 years later. So my advice would be, if you're looking at that just because you've been playing it in Gran Turismo and you can put a T78 in your car in the video game, that's 20 years old stuff. Okay, so you got to kind of keep up with the times.
Nowadays, would you say you have a specific affinity for any type of car? Here it's listed as American, European, or Japanese, but like tuner, muscle, exotic, like which would you be the most drawn to or identify with?
All right, I'm going to qualify my answer here before people send us hate email. There is a period where I was working for J.D. Power doing dealership audits. I audited more than 400 dealers across the country. I've been inside Dodge. Now, I also worked for NGK Spark Plugs as an OEM supplier to Ford, Dodge, Toyota, Mazda, Lexus, Mitsubishi, Honda, Acura, Nissan, all those brands. And then in America, Dodge, Ford, and Chrysler. As far as German cars, I haven't been but in one factory in Germany, but I've owned cars across all those nations, right? So American cars, I think Dodge is doing a great job with the Challengers and Chargers. Look how many people have gotten into those cars. They're great cars. They're fast. People seem to like them. If you're going in a straight liner doing donuts, that's the car, okay? If you want to go around a road course, then you're going to be looking at one of the Camaros, right? I'm still not a GM fan because I think their interiors have been really unpleasing to me. I know that's a minor thing to say, but I've just never been a GM fan. Not since the 1980s, I guess. But I do have appreciation for the Camaros and the Corvettes. The C7 Corvette is superb. As far as European cars, having owned two BMWs and both being very problematic, I do not see another BMW in my future. My wife has an Audi, and we love it. I've had an Audi, I loved it. I would never own a Mercedes or a BMW outside the warranty, because when you take a look at a SL55 when they were new, they were $103,000. You can buy one for $12,000 after 5 years. Just nobody wants to fix them. They're just crazy. So if I had to pick one, God, that would be tough. I would like to say Toyota, or Nissan, but that's just not the case anymore. I think Lexus builds the best cars in the world. Porsche's probably second, as far as reliability and quality and all that kind of thing. Audi's got to be in that list. Nissan is not on that list. Toyota, it depends on the car. I think their trucks are okay. Some of their cars, the motors they use on them aren't even Toyota motors anymore. So they've slipped from my ranking list, I guess. What I'm saying is that for any particular brand, there are cars in the line that are good. But if I'm spending my own money, yeah, it's going to be a Porsche, an Audi, or the only Nissan that Nissan makes well is really the R35 GTR, in my opinion. Toyotas, they still make some good cars. I think the Camry is okay. The new Camry is superb. BMW makes a few good cars. Who am I missing? I'm not going to talk about brands that we don't get in America, or brands that we do get in America, but they aren't very popular, like Land Rover, Jaguar. I won't even get into those. Fiat, Alfa, Vauxhall, Holden is now defunct, but there are plenty of good cars available from some manufacturers, a couple of good cars available from some manufacturers, and by and large, they're getting to be appliances.
Okay. Would you say, I know that most of the time people ask you, would you ever buy your Supra again, your R34 again? And you usually say no, but is there a car that you miss, even though you wouldn't buy again? Like, which car would you say you miss the most?
Good question. I usually at the top of the list, I put my Audi RS4, but I know I'd be even more bored with it now, because naturally aspirated car was really at its peak. After that, you'd have to do something crazy to make more horsepower. 420 horsepower at the time was fine, but now I'm way beyond that. I think if I had to drive one car around just to futz around with, it would be the R34. I would have, by now, that car would have been completely remodified, because all the movie car stuff and TVs and bullshit would have been removed, and it would have gone back to looking mostly stock, but more power. So that one I miss very much, but I wouldn't buy it back, because it's a movie car now, and that car is worth, $1 million+ because it's so rare. Paul Walker drove the car. He actually had it in his garage for a few months. He was literally driving it before the movie. So that car would be very expensive to buy back, and it's just not something I would want to do.
Right. This is a funny one. I could have probably started with this one, but have you, or do you still, or if you ever have, poorly worded question, have you ever collected Hot Wheels?
No. And here's why. Got nothing against Hot Wheels. When I was a kid, I grew up in the era where the first computer was like a Mac Commodore 64 or some shit like that.
Oh, yeah, I remember those.
Green screen. I grew up in the days where the video game that you had was Atari 2600 Pong. Ding, 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 ding. That was it. And then everything that came out, all the video games of that generation were 8-pixel cars, right? 8 pixels of shit. Okay? It was terrible. It was like the same thing applies to Legos. Any Lego project that is released, these Millennium Falcons and all these cars and so forth, and Dom's Charger and all that, looks to me like an 8-pixel rendition of the car. I was always into more detail. Even as a kid, 9 or 10 years old, I was building 3-foot-long model battleships where you have to paint every part, and they're 1/350th scale. So I still do it. I still build model ships. So I like a lot of detail. So Hot Wheels never appealed to me because they were just not right. The parts weren't right. You couldn't get the details. It just wasn't enough for me. So no, that's why I never got into Hot Wheels. I have a handful of these 1/18th, are they? I think the 1/18th cars. Fast and Furious cars that have been given to me or I went out and purchased. But
Yeah, I have a bunch of those on my wall too.
yeah, I used to have like more than 70 of them, all different types of cars, Mercedes, CLK, DTM cars, GTRs, and all that kind of stuff. But I gave those all away to the kids when I moved out of that house in Ladera some 10 years ago. So yeah, I collect other stuff, not that stuff.
Okay. Here's an interesting one. This could be a very short answer. Any current or new projects that you're working on or looking forward to that aren't locked behind an NDA, of course?
No, I'm pretty much standing pat with what I have. We just bought a house down here in Orange County, so we've been spending money on that. My R35 is getting ready to get some new seats put in. I keep doing the maintenance on that. I'm getting ready to do turbos at some point and the transmission at some point. And then I got to do some carbon fiber stuff. But that's it. I'm very content with the car. It doesn't need much. I mean, 700 horsepower on ethanol, can drive it every day, has a navigation system, has a CD player. I mean, where do you go from that?
I don't know. Because it depends on how balanced you want the car to be after that. Because if you keep making it faster and faster, it starts to lose that kind of original balance and capability, and then it becomes a bit insane.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to let that happen. I'm not going to do airbags and a Liberty Walk body kit and
right, yeah.
down at 4 foot tall wing and all that kind of stuff. So, I know what the purpose of this car is. It needs to be able to get up and down driveways. It needs to be able to drive without getting pulled over all the time. It needs to be able to swap the tires and wheels and go to the track. So it's right where I want it to be. Okay.
Doesn't sound like you're going to be getting rid of it anytime soon, but if there was any car out there that could replace your car, what would be the next sports car?
I got to go back to the McLaren 765 LT if I'm going to replace it with something. Honestly, if I was going to get another car, I would still keep this car. So if I was going to go buy something that wasn't a McLaren, I would go buy an old 240Z and do a build on that, So I'd build it the way I want to, probably do an RB26 in the thing, keep it with a Nissan engine. Or have another engine, a built L28 with triple Delorto side drafts and all that to keep it period correct. Good 5-speed gearbox, properly done interior that mimics the stock, but it's got some sound deadening and air conditioning.
Yeah, that's important.
Not to have air conditioning.
Yeah, I can barely not having air conditioning. I got back from vacation a few months ago. I went to Arizona, came back, got in my car, and realized the air conditioning needed to be recharged, and that was also shortly after I realized that the welds in my exhaust had broke as well. So I can relate to the need for air conditioning in the summer.